Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. The 2022 NFL Draft is behind us. It was full of twists and turns, and we saw a really difficult year for mock drafters, and that's something we take a lot of pride in. And I do want to note that Alex was yet again 2 years in a row top three among like the 20 or so top analysts in the media that we track in mock draft accuracy. It is worth noting that it was with half of the total correct guesses as last year. Alex had 6. I had 4, which put me about middle of the pack this year. Not as good as last year. We'll look to bounce back next year, but it really highlights that, in a year where with 6 and 4 correct picks, we had a good year predicting the first round. That shows how unpredictable this year was. So for you, what was the biggest surprise of the NFL draft?
I mean, right off the bat, I think it's the quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, we both expected I'd say at a minimum 2 quarterbacks to go first round, and no one expected all of them besides Kenny Pickett to fall to round 3. So that was a massive surprise. I think anyone would tell you that. But the other one that came to mind was the AJ Brown trade. I remember just being shocked when that came on screen, and I think it was Dan Jeremiah brought it up, and we're like, I mean, I guess it makes sense. The Titans don't want to pay him $25 million a year, but it kind of seemed like they were planning on paying him, and I was really just floored when that trade was announced. But I think the trade made sense for both sides, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
I think all the wide receiver movement was really out of the blue and made for a really fun draft. I think the top 10 picks, if you look at them, there wasn't really too big of a surprise anywhere. Maybe Thibodeau to the Giants, but it makes total sense. It's just not a connection that had become prevalent in the weeks coming up to the draft. And then it feels like everything broke loose once we got to the teens. Every pick we were announcing some kind of crazy trade. The Saints came up for Olave at 11, and then we had the Lions coming up at number 12 for Jameson Williams, and a move that I really liked for them. We'll get to the other side of that. Yeah, we'll get to the other side of that in a little bit. But as you said, AJ Brown was the big wide receiver on the move, and then there was also Marquise Brown as well. And I like that piece of business for the Ravens, getting a few years of solid production from Marquise Brown on a rookie contract, and then seeing where the wide receiver market went and thinking he might not really be a guy that we want to pay wide receiver 1 money to in this day and age with how much they're going for. And they flipped him for an even better pick than they originally picked him a few years ago. So that was good business for them.
Yeah, I think it was a great trade for the Ravens. I feel like the Cardinals might have overpaid for Hollywood Brown, but he does fit in that offense. I mean, he played in college with Kyler Murray, and I know Hopkins is suspended for this first 6 games, so that move makes even more sense now. But I also will bring up, once Hopkins is back, that puts Hollywood in the wide receiver 2 role where I really think he can thrive. So I think obviously the Ravens got that first round pick out of it. I think Hollywood's going to a place where he can perform better. 1, because of the offense that they'll be running in Arizona. 2, because his main role will probably be wide receiver 2, where he won't have that top end cornerback attention. And I think he's still got great speed. He's a good player. I think he could be a really, really good wide receiver 2 for the Cardinals.
Yeah, we talk about all these quarterback wide receiver connections from college. That chemistry is real. That's not something that the media fabricates. We see this working in the NFL when quarterbacks get reunited with wide receivers they played with in college. I expect Marquise Brown to really have a breakout year, especially in Kingsbury's system. And let's talk about a third name in that offense. I think Rondale Moore. If once Hopkins comes back, Brown gets to be the wide receiver 2, which suits him better. Rondale Moore as the wide receiver 3. I think you've got a lot of explosiveness in that offense. So I'm excited to see Kyler Murray's ability to throw the ball deep really get unleashed there. And we heard time and time again the Cardinals were looking for speed, and they were in the draft order at 23 where all the top 6 wide receivers were going to go, and they flew off the board. We didn't necessarily think Dotson and Burks would go top 20, but they did. And then, teams like Arizona and Green Bay were left without that top tier. So Arizona went and made that move.
Yeah, and I think, let's get back to talking about the draft a little bit. I mean, that is what everyone's here for. So let's talk about some of the first round picks that we really liked or thought were really good fits, and I'll let you start that one off.
Well, I'll start with what the Jets did with each pick. I think all in all, because they kept doing really well after day 1, it was really just one of the best draft classes I've seen in my time of scouting. I thought that Sauce Gardner at number 4 was the right pick. I mean, you look at the wide receivers you have in the AFC and in the AFC East. If you've got Tyreek Hill twice a year and Stephon Diggs twice a year, your top cornerback can't be Brandon Echols or Bryce Hall. And they got a guy who I think is going to be a bona fide lockdown cornerback in the NFL. And number 10, Garrett Wilson wasn't my wide receiver 1, but he's a really good wide receiver. He's going to be really reliable for Zach Wilson. I think that's really important. And then they come back into round 1 to get Jermaine Johnson, who was in free fall at that point, really. And that's a top 10 talent right there on the field. And we know how badly the Jets have needed a premier pass rusher. So it's hard to look at round 1 and not really get impressed by what the Jets did. And I think that this is really big for Joe Douglas because it's a crucial year for him as a general manager and for the team, with especially a year 2 improvement needed from Zach Wilson. I think they're on the right track there.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Sauce was the pick that needed to happen at 4. He was both of our number 2 player on the board. As a Jets fan, I was thrilled with that pick. I think he's going to be the next Revis in New York. I know those are big shoes to fill, but I really think he can fill them. And then touching on Garrett Wilson a little bit, you mentioned he wasn't your top wide receiver on the board. He wasn't mine either, but the pick makes a lot of sense for the Jets as a team. I would have preferred, Treylon Burks or Jameson Williams. Obviously, the NFL was not as high on Burks as we were, but you can make the argument, or even I can understand why they couldn't go Burks, because he probably still needs some time to develop and become that true wide receiver 1 at the NFL level. And obviously, Jameson Williams, who I also had above Wilson, he's coming back from an injury. He might not be ready till November. And the Jets needed a wide receiver that was ready to go day 1. And I think Garrett Wilson will be that. And he fits Zach Wilson's skill set very well. And touching on Jermaine Johnson really quickly, I was listening to Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks break down the draft, and DJ said he's talked to multiple GMs that just didn't know why he fell that far. I know we heard maybe some character concerns, but he didn't even mention that. He just said that that's just what happens sometimes in the draft. Guys fall, and that's basically those were the GM's responses to him. And, it just kind of happens, and not really sure why he fell, but he did. And, I thought that was a great move to, move up 10 or so spots to get, like you said, a top 10 talent.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about Wilson, and I hope they'll really use him deep too, because Zach Wilson is a really good thrower of the deep balls. If you go back and break down his college tape, and Garrett Wilson, we saw, has really good speed, ran a 4.39 at the combine. He just wasn't really asked to stretch the field as much at Ohio State. So I think that's a connection that you really want going downfield also. But I wouldn't be surprised if Wilson really had the best year of any rookie wide receiver for the reasons you stated, really. I want to talk about another one of these receiver moves, and that's the Lions moving up for Jameson Williams. And what astounds me there is the compensation, or really lack thereof. They moved up from 32 to pick 12, and essentially, let's look at it from the Vikings' point of view.
20 spots.
The Vikings moved down 20 spots in round 1 to move up 12 spots in round 2 and get pick 66 on top of that. That's minuscule. That's really minuscule. And from the Vikings' perspective, I strongly dislike it, because in the end, they didn't get a single player that I had a first-round grade on or a future first-rounder, and they started at pick 12. And not only that, but they let the Lions come up and get who I think is going to be a star receiver for them. And then in round 2, they trade down and let Green Bay come up for Christian Watson. So potentially for the next 10 years, they could be getting torched by these 2 wide receivers that they let other teams get. And especially the first trade, I really poor value for themselves. And then you look at the rest of their draft. They took Ed Ingram in the 2nd round. I don't like that value. In round 3, Brian Asamoah, another full round reach, according to my grade, and Kobe Dean and Chad Muma were there. So awesome trade for the Lions to go get Jameson Williams. I think the Vikings draft is a real head scratcher, especially with just how poor the value was on that trade for them.
It really didn't make any sense. We were watching the draft together, and when the Lions made that trade up, we thought it was for a quarterback. Like, it has to be. Yeah. They'd been rumored to, like Malik Willis. Maybe they were trying to jump up ahead of, maybe the Saints or the Steelers. And it was like, it has to be for Malik Willis, and they have to be giving up a future first-round pick.
Yeah.
And then we saw what the Vikings were getting back, and like you said, it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And then, like you mentioned too, add on top of that this is their division rival. Your number one goal every single year in the NFL should be to make the playoffs by winning your division. And you're going to make it harder on yourself to win the division when you give your division rival, arguably the top 3 receiver in the draft, and he's probably not 1 or 2 for most people because of his injury. And that, shouldn't be a long-term thing. It wouldn't shock me if Jameson Williams is the best wide receiver to come out of this draft class, 5 years from now.
Yeah, and you could even argue Minnesota should have stuck right there and taken him. It might not be the biggest need, but you got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and Jameson Williams. Oh, wow.
They could have stuck there and taken Kyle Hamilton at 12 instead of taking Lewis Cine at 32. So, like you mentioned, the Vikings draft was just really confusing from an outsider's perspective. I want to talk about the other New York team, and what the Giants did in round 1. You mentioned they took Kayvon Thibodeau at 5. They also took Evan Neal at 7. I thought those were both really good picks. Hit their pretty much biggest positions of need of shoring up that defensive line and offensive line. And really the 2 best players on my board at the time. I thought there was rumors of Thibodeau maybe falling outside the top 10. The Giants said, no way, we're taking him at 5. And I assumed that they got their offensive tackle 1 and Evan Neal when the Panthers took Ike Ekwonu at 6.
Yeah, I mean, we heard all about how Joe Schoen was highly, highly touted as a general manager. The second he accepted that job in New York, everyone was really in agreement that, he was the top guy in the process. He's got a really bright future ahead of him, and I think he really showed that in night 1 with grabbing 2 really blue chip players for that organization at premium positions too.
Yeah, I think another draft that I really liked, we mentioned Kyle Hamilton a minute ago, the Ravens. Yeah. I mean, day 1, day 2, day 3, I think they really hit on all cylinders. And, the Ravens have drafted really well for a long time, so really no surprise. But, Kyle Hamilton at 14 I thought was great value. Taking Linderbaum with that pick they got from the Hollywood Brown trade, there were a lot of rumors that Linderbaum would fall out of round 1. I had a mid-round 1 grade on him. I thought he was the best center in the draft, and maybe because he lacked positional versatility, was a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, he'd fall out of round 1. I thought the Ravens got a really good player there, and they needed help at the center position. I think he'll step in day 1, start for them, and I think he'll really help improve that already good Ravens offensive line.
Yeah, honestly, within a few years' time, we could look at the Ravens depth chart and see 7 starters from this draft class. I love what the Ravens did. It might be right up with the Jets as the best draft class in this entire draft. As you said, Hamilton, Linderbaum, they're day 1 high-impact starters. David Ojabo, he might miss nearly his whole rookie year. He's going to be a really good NFL player. That's something that I'm really confident in. And then you got Travis Jones, who's really high upside, showed at the Senior Bowl that he can really just go out there and beat up some of the best offensive linemen in this draft. Daniel Falele is a guy that has caught a lot of heat because people don't like his, kind of unorthodox frame in that he's 6'9", but he's a good athlete for that size. And I think he has starter potential if he fixes up some of that technique. And then they got Jalen Armour-Davis, who I think has all the traits to be a starter. Again, it's just kind of a matter of technique there. Charlie Kohler, he has the potential to make an impact. Isaiah Likely, same thing. Then they got a guy who can really be a pro bowler at the punter position in Jordan Stout. So, wow, it's a deep class, and pending really their ability to develop players, which we know they do well, this can be an all-star draft class for the Ravens. And actually, I want to mention too that they got jumped for their selection the first 3 rounds. For each of the first 3 rounds, there was a team that came up into the spot right before them, took the player they were going to take, and they still came away with this draft class. Yeah,
I mean, extremely impressive by the Ravens. And I mean, I know Ozzie Newsome isn't the general manager now, but he set a great foundation for them. And then, him and Jim Harbaugh have done a great job also in developing players. I think the Daniel Falele pick makes a lot of sense with what the Ravens like. I mean, they took Orlando Brown a few years ago, who also, if you remember, he was a potential round one talent and then had a horrible combine. Apparently,
Yeah.
he weighed way too much. He couldn't run, blah, blah, blah. He was too big. They took him in, I think it was round three, and,
Yeah.
traded him for a first round pick because he wanted to play left tackle. And I think they could have gotten their new right tackle in Daniel Falele.
Yeah, I totally agree. How about we circle back to the quarterbacks for a second? Because, we kind of mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast without really getting into it. And it is fascinating because there were really solid round one projections for a few of these guys. Kenny Pickett went to Pittsburgh, and I think that's just a really good fit. He was the top quarterback on both our boards. Makes sense. But then after that, why really do you think that each of these guys fell?
So it's a little bit confusing, honestly, why they fell. We know teams needed quarterbacks. We had round one grades on two of them that fell in Willis and Matt Corral. But I think part of the reason they fell, in all honesty, is teams knew they would get one of them if they waited. I
Mm-hmm.
think if you really look at it, you really step back and look, there weren't many teams that really needed a quarterback this year. And we knew they're not, bona fide Pro Bowl future, all-star quarterbacks. They're projections, guys that need to sit a little bit. So I've thought teams valued them properly, and they just said, you know what? Looking at the teams that need quarterbacks, we'll wait and we'll take whichever guy's left. And to me, it seems like everyone was willing to play that waiting game until round three, and it was like, all right, like even if we don't need a quarterback this year, let's take one for next year or the year after. And I think, especially the Titans, I think that's what they did. I love that pick of Malik Willis. I think he'll sit and learn behind Ryan Tannehill. And, I wouldn't be shocked if Ryan Tannehill's gone after this year and Malik Willis is ready to start at quarterback. He's got a great running back behind him in Derrick Henry. But yeah, if you really look at it, the teams that needed quarterbacks this year, people said the Saints. Obviously, the Saints didn't believe that. They didn't take a quarterback at all. The Steelers were the only team to take a QB in round one. And then the Falcons, the Panthers. Those were teams that, people said maybe they need a quarterback, but they have a starter at least in place for this year. So, we'll wait, see if one falls to us. And they did. So, the bottom line to me is teams were willing to wait and get the quarterback that fell to them. And all those teams decided to play the waiting game. And I guess this is what happens.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some teams though that passed on these guys in round three, where I was just like, man, look at your starter. I'd take a shot on Malik Willis or Matt Corral this deep in the
Seahawks.
draft. Yeah, like the
Seahawks,
Seahawks, for
totally.
example, like even the Giants. I mean, you're in round three. I don't. You could pick Malik Willis over Joshua Azudu. Like it'd be a solid investment in just having a shot at already finding your long-term quarterback. But I think that some teams played this waiting game, and you're definitely right that we saw that bears fruits for Atlanta, for Tennessee, and Carolina managed to find their way back in and get a quarterback, which I think was really good for them because it seemed like they were really just in a bad place with the sixth overall pick and the 137th, but they did get back in there and get Matt Corral, which I really liked for them. But there were other teams like the Seahawks, like the Giants, like the Lions that I think just decided we don't care how far they fall. We're not going quarterback this year. We're going to strengthen the roster in other spots, and we're going to figure out the quarterback question in a next year, because I think for them they just want to drop that quarterback in when they're confident in him, and it'll be with the use of a first round pick within the next 2 years is what I would expect. But now looking more individually at each of these quarterbacks, I think Matt Corral fell really because of some of the issues in his past. And Ian Rappaport shed light on this, that there's been issues with depression and with alcohol, with unreliable behavior. And if you think about it, that could all be connected. And that's something that it sounds like is in his past, which is really good, but that's probably why teams were hesitant to take him, because on tape, I think he's the best quarterback in this class on tape alone.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
He's got tremendous potential. And then what it is for Willis and Ritter might actually just be that the NFL was not as high on them as the media.
I did hear a little bit of concerns regarding Willis's transfer from Auburn to Liberty. Chris Sims brought that up this week when talking about the draft. So I think that also might have played into account a little bit. And I think, people pushing Ritter up to round 1, I thought was way overblown.
Yeah.
And I think, we really got that right in our evaluations. We didn't buy into this round 1 hype. We had round 3 grades on him, and that's where he fell. And I think deservedly so. I think he could be a average starter, and I think sitting behind Marcus Mariota is a great spot for him to try to develop and maximize his potential. The last quarterback that I want to bring up, Sam Howell. I do not think he should have fallen to round 5, especially after his 2020 tape, which was very, very good. He had a lackluster 2021 season. He also had a 3rd-round grade. But, I mean, there's no reason he should have fallen to round 5 to the Washington Commanders, who I really, really like that pick for them.
Yeah.
I think he sits behind Carson Wentz. We know Carson Wentz is injury prone, so he could potentially start a few games this year. But I think if he is going to turn it around, he's in a great spot. They're a very talented roster. I would not be shocked if, 2023 season, maybe he's competing for that starter spot in Washington. Maybe they got their quarterback of the future in round 5.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you look at it, this was a bad quarterback class. We could get a couple long-term starters coming outside the first 2 rounds, which would be pretty remarkable.
That would just be so weird to hear, oh, this is a historically bad quarterback class. And we genuinely could see 3 to 4 starters from rounds 3 and round 5 in Sam Howell. So it's, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. Is it really a bad quarterback class if you get 4 starters out of it?
Yeah,
I would argue no.
Totally. Now, talking about quarterbacks, I think one quarterback who's already been drafted in the NFL who can't be happy with the outcome of this draft is Justin Fields. I really don't understand what the Bears did in this draft, because I think the huge priority of this offseason had to have been, we need to get Justin Fields up to speed. He didn't have the rookie year maybe we were expecting, and I know it's a new regime, but I mean, they took these jobs. It means that they think that Justin Fields can be a franchise quarterback. But then they did pretty little in free agency. They spent their first 2 picks on the defensive side of the ball. Granted, they were really good values. I mean, Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker are going to be solid starters in this league, and they were good values. But, man, you didn't do anything for Justin Fields. And then in the 3rd round, they picked Velus Jones, which I thought was not a good pick, because he's, to me, a 5th-rounder on tape, really just a raw receiver who isn't complete. And he's 25. And he's never had an 800-yard receiving season in college. So that one was really surprising to me. And then you come out of it and you look at the Bears draft, and I don't know if they drafted an offensive starter in an offseason where the priority has to be getting Justin Fields to take the next step.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the Jets do it in the draft. We saw the Jaguars do it in free agency. The Patriots, not really sure what they're doing, but they got help from Mac Jones last offseason as well, through free agency. So, I mean, if you look at it, all these teams, and obviously Trey Lance already has a ton of pieces around him in San Francisco to succeed. So all these teams with second-year quarterbacks either already have pieces or prioritize this offseason to get pieces to help their developing quarterback. And it really does seem like the Bears just kind of ignored it. And I get maybe those guys were the best players on your board. Maybe you don't agree 100% with that for every single pick, but go best player available, but also you have to prioritize helping your rookie quarterback. So maybe it's your 2nd or 3rd best player available, but it's, still a wide receiver that could help you out, because really, who's Justin Fields going to throw the ball to? Allen Robinson is gone. It's just really an unfortunate situation for Justin Fields, because I think he has a lot of potential to be a good starter in the NFL, but he's not going to succeed if he doesn't get any help.
Yeah, I agree on that one. And you were talking about the Patriots, and they tried to help Mac Jones. There was a really controversial pick in the 1st round with Cole Strange. It might have even gotten to the point where there was too much hate on him. I think that he has the potential to be a good starter. He's got really remarkable athleticism, and he played well against good competition. Doesn't change the fact that it was a big reach, though. I don't think it was as much of a reach, though, as the Cowboys taking Tyler Smith in round 1. If we're talking about, we've talked a lot about what we liked in this draft. Now, getting a little bit into what we disliked, I think that might have been the worst pick in round 1 for me, honestly, because to me, he's so raw, and you don't really see any type of hand-feet coordination. He resorts to grabbing a lot. There's going to be a lot of holding penalties on him in the NFL. So I wasn't too sure about either of those picks in round one, especially Tyler Smith.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Saints earlier, but I felt like they reached on Olave, like we said, trading up to 11,
Yeah.
ahead of Jamison Williams. I thought, that was a reach. And then
Penning's
Trevor
a risky
Penning,
pick
I
too.
felt like you're right. It was risky, a little bit of a reach. I know they needed that tackle position solidified, but, it felt like a reach. So the two other picks that I wasn't a fan of in the first round.
Man, the Saints aren't scared to go trade up for non-quarterbacks. So
They're
when they see
not.
a guy, they really go for it.
Well, it was two picks in a row where we thought a team was possibly trading up for a quarterback, and in the Saints, we're like, oh, they're trading up to 11. It must. Why else would you trade up? It's got to be a quarterback, and then took Chris Olave, which, not a big fan of that. And then the Lions traded up the pick after and took Jameson Williams, which I thought was a great pick for them. So, if just the Saints, maybe if you took Jameson Williams instead, it would have been a lot better of a pick. And they don't need that wide receiver right from day one. I'm assuming Michael Thomas is going to be back. So, I thought Jameson Williams as pretty much a wide receiver 1A to Michael Thomas when both of them are healthy could really help out Jameis Winston better than maybe Chris Olave could.
Yeah, I was actually surprised the Saints didn't go with Kenny Pickett. I thought he was just such a good fit for that offense. They rely so much on throwing the ball into the intermediate portion of the field, slants, quick processing, going through your progressions. And that's what Pickett does well. But, I guess they're trusting Jameis Winston, and we'll see what comes of that. I'll give you a one pick that got a lot of hate, but that I did like, and that's Treylon Burks. I mean, this is a guy that I almost wish people in the media took a step back in this draft process and listened to what they were saying about him, because he drew comparisons to A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel. But then people were like, yeah, I don't know about taking him in the first round. He's not that complete of a route runner. He's my wide receiver 6. I'm like, you just said what you should say is that, he reminds you of Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown. And so what I really like is that he goes to Tennessee, where they just had A.J. Brown for years. They know how they made him hit the ground running really well, coming out of a simplistic scheme at Ole Miss and a really productive wide receiver early in his career in the NFL. And I think they're going to do exactly the same thing with Treylon Burks. And essentially, they'll get similar production to A.J. Brown a lot cheaper. So I like the move for Tennessee, and I love the landing spot for Treylon Burks. I think he's going to go prove a lot of people wrong. Being the 6th wide receiver in this draft class, he's going to burn some teams for that.
Oh, totally. And I think I also love it because he has a chance to prove us right with us making him our wide receiver 1. It was the perfect spot for him because, like you said, they know how to use they knew how to use A.J. Brown, and I really thought that was a great comp for Treylon Burks.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how we've made it 28 minutes without talking about the first overall pick in the draft. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think you guys probably know how we feel about Trayvon Walker, but just to really hear Trayvon Walker go number 1 was still just wow, why would you take him over Aiden Hutchinson or any of the other at least 3 edge defenders that I had rated above Trayvon Walker? So, not a great pick by the Jaguars at the top. But I thought after that first overall pick, they did a really, really good job in building up that roster, getting quality players that, fell a little bit, especially in Devin Lloyd. They traded back up to, was it 27?
Yeah.
To pick Devin Lloyd, and just a great pick by the Jaguars.
And I'll tell you what, we're not the biggest fans of the Trayvon Walker pick. It's really an unprecedented amount of projection for the first overall pick. You really want a safer bet there, but I think that he makes the Devin Lloyd pick even better than it would be standing alone, because he's going to occupy blockers at the line of scrimmage for sure. And then you can use Devin Lloyd off the edge to really wreak havoc. I think he's really going to free up Lloyd. Same thing with Muma, who was an absolute steal in the 3rd round. And outside of that, they're getting a solid starting center in Luke Fortner. The Jaguars made a questionable pick at first overall, and Walker, unfortunately, will always be compared to Aiden Hutchinson, because don't get me wrong, I think Walker's going to have a good career. He's going to be a good player. I don't think he's going to be a pro ball, pro type player, and that's what I think a Hutchinson can be. But overall, it's a team that needed to get better. The first pick wasn't the right decision, in my opinion, but they did get better. They definitely got a lot better.
if you really just step back and look at the draft haul overall, great draft haul. It's just,
Yeah,
it's that first overall tag to Treylon Walker that, kind of sours the taste a little bit. But
yeah, I
you
agree.
can't deny a good draft when you see one.
Yeah,
As we wrap up, I was gonna
yeah.
say as we wrap up, let's hit on a few other draft classes that we liked overall. I'll start off. The Chiefs. I love both their first round picks. Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis was a steal at 29. I thought he's borderline top 10 talent.
At 30,
People
yeah.
or 30, my bad. Like I said, borderline top 10 talent, extremely powerful, pushes the pocket. I mean, he's not going to be a 15 sack guy every season, but he's going to get constant pressure on that quarterback, and that's really needed in that AFC West, which is a powerhouse division.
Yeah, totally agree that they nailed it, especially in round one. And that can be the difference between, making the Super Bowl or not for when you're one of the best teams in the league to get a couple solid starters playing already as rookies. I really like what the Seahawks did. I mean, Charles Cross at ninth overall, that's one of the best picks in round one. Boye Mafe is a guy who I thought was solid value at top of round two, and he's got all the upside in the world. Kenneth Walker was a pick that surprised me, but the more I thought about it, the more it grew on me because they do have a couple of productive running backs in Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, but those guys are one, injury prone, and two, a little one-dimensional. Kenneth Walker is explosive, and he's going to add an element to that offense that can really change things. And it can help them get through the transition away from Russell Wilson. I think that was really important for them. Abraham Lucas is a guy who can turn into a quality starting tackle if he develops correctly. Kobe Bryant is going to be a productive rotational cornerback. Tariq Woolen was a guy that I was surprised to see slide all the way to the fifth round because we're talking about a 6'4" cornerback who runs in the 4.2s, who's really long, who's fluid, who's been a wide receiver in the past, so he's got the ball skills. You just got to coach him up. I mean, he's really raw. You just got to coach him up. He fits perfectly what the Seahawks look for in a cornerback. I can't believe he went round 5. And then I'll give you one more name in their draft class. Round 7, Bo Melton. He's a wide receiver I had a third-round grade on who I think can start in the NFL. So, wow, altogether, the Seahawks had one of the best draft classes and definitely important, as I said, when you're transitioning away from really one of the best quarterbacks you've had in your franchise history.
Oh, totally. And I think one other team that I want to mention, the Houston Texans. Obviously, I would have taken Sauce over Derek Stingley at 3. But again, overall, if you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but Stingley could be just as good as Sauce. If you get 2019 Stingley, you're getting one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. So it's a high upside pick that could definitely pan out.
Totally. And again, like I said with the Jaguars, if you take a step back, look at the overall draft haul.
Oh yeah,
really, really good. I mean, Kenyon Green with their second first round pick, and then Christian Harris, I thought was a great pick.
Yeah.
In round 3, I think he could be a really good linebacker for them. I had a round 2 grade on him. We were a little bit concerned about, maybe he doesn't play as hard because that's kind of what showed up on the 2021 tape. But the Texans have Alabama connections. I'm sure they wouldn't have taken him if Saban said, yeah, probably pass on this guy. So I have some hope for him that he'll regain his national championship game for him from 2021. So again, the Texans, another team that acquired a lot of talent, and they needed to.
Yeah. So I think that really just wraps up the draft. That we could keep talking for so long, but everyone watched it themselves. They can go check out all this stuff too. So I think that summarizes a lot of what we liked, what we didn't like, what we were surprised with. And, we're real draft nerds over here. So I'm already itching to get to the 2023 class. We've heard so much about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. So I've been really resisting the urge to turn on that tape already. And I think I will in the coming weeks because let's see if the hype does match up. I've watched a little bit of them, like just live games, and they are impressive. So I can't wait to dig into their tape and really everyone else in the upcoming class. And we'll be keeping everyone posted with these recaps division by division for the draft, while also starting to turn our eye to next year, get some scouting reports in and probably some interviews too for the 2023 cycle.
Yeah, and you mentioned interviews. Last thing before we wrap this up, I just want to shout out all the guys we interviewed for the 2022 draft, whether it was before the season or after the season while they were prepping for the draft. And all the guys that got drafted or signed with teams as undrafted free agents, congrats to all of them. I'm just excited to see how their future careers play out. So
I mean,
thanks everyone.
it's always exciting when you interview Luke Gadecki and then he's drafted second round and he's going to go protect Tom Brady. I mean, that's a dream for what we're doing right now with at Bull Take Scouting, and we definitely are going to look to bring out more of these guys. So thank you everyone for watching. And it was really exciting and this whole draft cycle. Appreciate all the support, and we're just going to keep hitting the ground running.